What's up, everybody? It's your girl, Kairi Thomas-Brooks, and I'm coming to you with yet another live 21 question show. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Here on 21 Questions, I will be bringing officers from across the nation here to sit down with them and ask them questions about what's going on in today's society to build better connections. I am an aspiring civil rights lawyer. Yes, I would love to be a civil rights attorney. I am an advocate for this amazing initiative called Hey Blue. Hey Blue has been forming amazing community and police officer connections for about 2 years now. Here on the show, I'll be asking the officer 10 questions. The officer will get a chance to ask me 10 questions back, and our 21st question will come from our audience. Without further ado, as I mentioned last week, I will be introducing our next guest, Commander Marc Claycomb from the Melbourne Police Department. Commander Marc, are you there?
I am here.
Hi.
How are you tonight?
How are you? Thank you.
I'm fantastic.
Thank you.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Woo, wow. It's been a long day, Commander. Thank you again just for coming on.
My pleasure.
And having this conversation. All right. So before we start, I would just like to ask you a little bit about yourself. So do you mind elaborating?
Sure. So I've been in law enforcement going on 31 years as a first responder. I started in fire rescue and then went over to law enforcement in 1991. I started in a small beachside agency in Brevard County. And then in 1997, I moved to the Melbourne Police Department, and I've been there ever since. And I presently hold the position of Commander of Community Services Division at the Melbourne Police Department.
Wow. So you like Melbourne? You grew up there?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I was born and raised in Melbourne Beach, and I've lived in Brevard County my whole life.
Imagine growing up on the, I would love that. All right, Commander, I'm going to get into our first question.
Okay.
And to you, that would be, why did you decide to become an officer in the first place?
Well, that's a great question. I actually wanted to go into naval aviation when I was in high school and growing up. And around the time that I was going to do that, as I started to graduate in '89, they started cutting seats in the officer candidate school and in the flight programs. And I kind of deviated course, and I actually got into fire rescue. I was an EMT on the ambulance in a group that was called the Harbor City Volunteer Ambulance Squad that pre-existed before Brevard County Fire Rescue. And in doing that, I met a lot of police officers, and I was able to get a liking for that. Didn't know I would like law enforcement. And as I got into that, I had a chief in Melbourne Beach that offered me a job, and I took it. He paid for the training, and I took the job, and I've never looked back. I really, really, really enjoy what I do.
So how does it feel to like have somebody invest in you like that? That's pretty cool because, you know, if someone was like, hey, go all the way and I'll pay for you, I'd be like, oh yeah.
It's not just super cool. It's amazing. It is amazing to have people that believe in you and invest in you. It is a feeling you can't explain unless you've had it yourself. And it's an amazing feeling.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So my second question to you, Commander, would be, with the current climate that's going on with cases like Kyle Rittenhouse and Breonna Taylor, how do you think this going on within, like, you know, on social media and everything affects the trust that officers have with people of color?
That officers have with people of color?
Yes. And vice versa.
I think that's going to be situationally dependent. I think that's going to be department and community dependent. But I mean, in the big picture, I think what it offers is an opportunity just like this for both the community and law enforcement to come together. We keep hearing about transparency. And quite honestly, I've found in 2020, it's about transparency and it's about the conversations like we're having now, but it's also about education, right? So it's education and it's both ways. And the area where I think we have a lot to invest acutely, among other things, this is not the only thing, is informing our community what we do and how we do it. Because what we found is a lot of the things that are being asked for, we already do and have been doing for years, but the community doesn't know it. So here's a great opportunity to share with the community what we're doing, how we do it, why we do it, or why we don't do it. And bring them in, which is community academies. It's conversations in the Police Community Relations Council. Right. It's conversations through Hey Blue. It's conversations in Word is Bond. It's all of those opportunities to connect and educate so that we can get rid of the ignorance. I know you talked about ignorance on your other show, and that's not always a bad thing. That's just in a position of not knowing. So I think it's really an opportunity more than anything, regardless of the community that you're in. And we're blessed in the community that we're in because we have a great relationship with our community. Does not mean there's not areas for improvement, and we're certainly working on those now.
I have to agree with what you said about everything and the ignorance. Because, a lot of people think, well, you said I'm ignorant, that was a jab. And I'm like, no, because being ignorant doesn't always mean that it's a bad thing. It just means
correct.
You're enlightened about something. Yes. I think a lot of people misunderstand that.
Agreed.
Okay, Commander. So my third question to you would be, what was the hardest thing that you had to respond to?
There's been a lot of really hard things. The one that comes to mind is a train crash that killed 3 young ladies. It was difficult, but there's been a lot. There's been a lot of difficult calls to go to. Wow.
And what I want to know is, how did you deal with that? Wow, that's a question. I guess I can ask that as my fourth question. Question number 4. That leads into something. That's perfect. How do you respond to a scene like that? Being all, because you do go through, oh no, I forgot the term, de-escalation training. Yes. How have you ever gotten so rattled that you forget your training that because that what you just said seems like I would absolutely.
I can't remember a time that I got out of the training doing its part, right? I mean, that's why we train.
Right.
You kind of go into, I affectionately refer to it as work mode. You train and you train and you train. So it's a reactive response. It's not a thoughtful response.
Right.
And you go into work mode and you just do what needs to be done to address the issue, get people out of harm's way and protect people. And then you need to make sure that you involve yourself in self-care after and address the stressors and the PTSD. And Melbourne and the agencies of Brevard County have an incredible peer support program and critical incident stress management program to address just those things.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Because I know a lot of people get really rattled, because I know that I would get extremely rattled during a situation like that. But you do go through a lot of training. And that's why I asked. I was like, well, maybe, there's it fluctuates, or maybe it doesn't. So that was a good answer, because I really was not aware.
Well, and I will say this too. We're not superhuman. We're human beings with emotion, and it depends on the person. It depends on the call. I know that calls with kids were much harder after I had my own. Not that they were easy ever. They're some of the worst, but they were much harder after I had my own child than before. So it's really situationally and person dependent, but we do train a lot for the ability to respond and be cool under pressure and get the job done, because that's what we're here to do. And then take care of the human part after the fact so we can not suffer long-term from things.
Now, you mentioned you had kids. How many do you have?
I have one. I have one 17-year-old girl who's a senior in high school.
Oh, oh man. The life of a dad, huh?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've had her full time for about 7 years now. So I get a lot of quality time with her. And I saw on one of your other shows that you rely on your mom for some stuff and you rely on your dad for some other stuff. So I'm not a girl, so I have to rely on my medical training to connect with her and some of those girl stuff. But we're doing good. She's a great kid, like yourself. She's very smart, and she's going to do great things just like you.
Well, dealing with Hey Blue, because you love story time, and I love absolutely doing that with you. Having a father like you, I would expect her to be nothing less. So
thank you very much. You're welcome. You are too kind.
So my fifth question to you, or fourth question, I sort of tied two, and so
you get a bonus question. It's your show.
Okay, cool. So my fifth question to you would be, do you understand the difference between the Black Lives Matter organization and the Black Lives Matter movement and concept?
I think I do, but I think it's also situationally dependent and person dependent. So I'd love to hear your take on that. Always learning. But I'll also share something I saw on Chef Jamie's Facebook page the other day that resonated with me, but I'd still love to hear your input. But I just want to share it is, I'm going to try to quote it. Black Lives Matter, not the movement, not the organization, actual Black Lives Matter. And when it comes to equity and equality, 100% in. So on that note, I'd love to hear your take on those two things so I can not be ignorant and be educated.
Well, actually, I was going to ask you before I elaborated who Chef Jamie was. Can you enlighten me on that?
Absolutely. James Thompson, a local incredible chef at Chef's Table near Amici's. And he's actually part of the Hey Blue Advisory Board. So you've seen him a couple times on that he's a incredible chef. So that may play a part in my questions for you. So we'll come back to that.
Okay, cool. Now you asked me for my opinion.
Yes.
On the two. I think a lot of people misinterpret when someone says Black Lives Matter. A lot of it comes from societal terms when it comes to funding. The organization, pumping money into it, selling T-shirts, everything like that. But the concept of Black Lives Matter is exactly, honestly, it's right in the name. That's how I would explain it to somebody who would want to know more about it. Just dealing with the injustices and everything that goes on, because not everyone's life can't matter until we start breaking down the fundamentals of every other culture and every other race. And I think it's right in the name. So yeah, that's how I would explain it to you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So my sixth question for you would be, besides working with Hey Blue, amazing initiative, what are you doing outside or inside your community to help build better bonds between police officers and the citizens?
Well, it's an excellent question. I am heavily invested in Hey Blue. So there's, as you know, several pieces to the Hey Blue puzzle and a ton more to come. So I enjoy going out with John and Hey Blue for Hey Blue Selfies for Change. I love story time. And when we're not in COVID, although I got to say, COVID was good to us. I know that sounds super weird and hard to understand, but COVID was good to us in that we went from South Brevard County public schools and then as far north as the charter school in Cocoa, Emma Jewel, to having to do it virtually and going nationwide and then really international now with the advisory council. So it actually was a force multiplier. John loves it when I use that word, but a force multiplier for Hey Blue and building that network and getting the expanse. So that's pretty full time. I absolutely educate my daughter, and we talk about social issues and things that are in the news, and not just police stuff, but Black Lives Matter and justice and equity and equality. Right. And, a number of things. And really anybody who'll sit down and listen, that I will tell them about Hey Blue and everything that we do. And then in the police department, I'm the commander of the community services division. So my division is really all of the forward facing stuff. So it's the community resource officers, it's recruiting. We're going to come back to that. It's the SROs, it's the community service officers. So it's all of other than the police officers in black and white police cars responding to calls, it's all of that community interaction, community connectivity, super duper important always, but especially right now. So that's really where I spend a great deal of my time and energy.
Well, that's amazing that you sit and you talk to your daughter, because I know in my generation, most parents sort of just leave their kids like astray. And it's difficult to find parents who really want to sit down and really want to connect with their kid. It's like, hey, this is what's going on now, and this is what you need to know, because you're preparing us for when, we get older. And I thought that was amazing when you stated that, because I go to school with a lot of kids who are just completely blind to the fact that I'm like, no offense to the parents, but, what are you teaching your kids? What substance are you giving them? So yeah.
And I think part of that is because these can be hard conversations, and parenting in and of itself can be hard depending on the age too. But, and sometimes they don't know how to have the conversation.
Right.
sometimes they might not have all the information to have the conversation. So it's initiatives just like this, just like Black Lives Matter, just like some of the other social justice groups that are going on and the conversations that are being had that will hopefully educate the masses so that they can educate their families as well. So,
right. And now actually off of that, do you tend to not really screen? I know this is a personal question, so forgive me, but with your 17-year-old, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, everything that goes on, do you when you mention sitting down and talking to her about right from wrong, do you go through a depict, like, does she come to you, she's like, hey dad, this is what happened, and you're like, hang on, that's false. Let's sit down, let's talk about it. Do you have many conversations that spawn off of social media?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Some of them from mine to her, some of them from her to mine. We of course share funny cat videos also, but
right.
I do limit some of her electronics and social media access. She has earned trust through the years to be able to expand out and show me that she can use it responsibly. I trust but verify. I still have the kill switch to take everything off of her phone but the ability to call me. And she's a great kid though. She checks in and we have conversations about a lot of stuff. And I have tried to create an environment that she can come to me and talk about absolutely anything without judgment, and to be able to work through issues or questions, or if she has a significant problem that she's got a safe space to talk so we can work through it.
Right. That's good. Because like I said, most parents are sort of just like, you'll figure it out. Just, that's amazing. I can't think of a better way to raise a kid. I'm sorry. Being involved in, your child's life, I think that's something.
Well, you touched on go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, what I was going to add was my dad actually, he sits down and every day it's a conversation that helps me excel. It's literally nothing more, nothing less. He's very blunt and he's straight to the point. So whenever something happens, I'm like, hey dad, this just happened on social media. He's like, no, all right, let's sit down and let's talk about it. And he was just telling me the other day, he wishes that there were more parents, regardless of the career field that you're in, that will sit down and speak to your kids about it. So
agreed. Parenting is a lost art, it appears.
Yeah.
But you touched on something, and now I can't remember what it was, but I wanted to go back to. So parenting is about not just telling my kid what to do. It's preparing my child to be her own person and have independence and take care of herself. So you have to prepare them to be able to do that. You can't just not answer questions and not educate them and not prepare them for life. You just can't do that.
Right.
And I've also found a fan of your dad. He is, I think, high speed, low drag like me. So we're just going to get straight to the point so we can discuss the issue and move on.
Thank you. Thank you. He is very much so. Like sometimes, and like you said, you've got to use your medical expertise to deal with your daughter. Sometimes they'll be like, Dad, and he's like, you're too emotional. I don't understand why you're complaining. Like, why? And I'm like, Dad, it's important. He's like, he ends up calling Mom, and Mom's like, Armon, this is what it is, And so that was funny when you mentioned that.
I have to try to switch into mom mode because sometimes those guys just don't get it right. So I have to switch.
Right.
And be there for her. So she's got somebody to vent to and understand without trying to solve the problem.
Right. All right. Commander, I actually have my 7th question for you.
Okay.
That would be on our first show, our first 21 question show. Corporal Brandon Fleming had given his perception and his opinion on what white supremacy and white privilege is. Do you mind answering that question? Can I ask you, what is your opinion on white privilege?
Well, I think it exists. I know it exists. I don't know that it's broad spectrum. I don't know that I have ever benefited from it, but when and where it does exist, again, this goes to the education side, right? I'm all ears to learn things that I may not know, but if that flies in the face of equality and equity, which by design, I'm confident it does, then we need to address it and we need to dismantle it and find solutions for it. And I'm here to help you do that in any way that I can. As far as white supremacy, it's ugly. It's not acceptable. It comes in many forms, and I denounce it completely.
Oh my gosh. that was amazing. Corporal Fleming, actually, he had answered the same way that you did. He was sort of like, well, and he sort of paused. And he was like, there's a lot of issues with condemning the whole ideology. And he just went into, it was your answer exactly. And I'm glad to see that you guys are willing, because every time you answer, you're like, if there's something that if I don't know, if there's something that I'm missing, please tell me, because that's the best way that we all learn. You know what I mean? Like what we're doing is sitting down right now, we're talking, we're connecting. That's your best way and your best bet at anything. So thank you for being open-minded, I should say.
You're very welcome. I have found in my many years on this planet, I think it's an aha moment the first time, because you don't know what you don't know until you find out you don't know it, right? So the first time you realized, oh, I didn't know that. You realize that you don't know everything, right? But you think you do, especially when you're younger. Right. And especially when you are actively wanting to be part of the solution and you're actively wanting to bring people together in a racial inequality sense, or just teams in a sports game. It's important to listen. It's important to be open. It's important to have the diversity, different skill sets, different seats on the bus for people to make sure they're in the right seat for whatever mission you're on. And it's super important.
Right. Right. Now, dealing with that leads me into my 8th question for you. And that would be, as a kid growing up, because Corporal Fleming actually had asked me a question like this, and I was like, ooh, I sort of like the way he asked that, so I'm going to flip it. What have you learned about relations and dealing with people of color? Was there a certain, not really stereotype that you grew up on, or was there not a stereotype that you grew up on? Is there something now that you learned when you were young and you're like, that's not true? Or if there was something that you learned then and now you're like, oh, I can see the resemblance, or I see the similarities?
Well, I'm going to go back to Chef Jamie for a minute. This is not a plug for Chef Jamie, but we've had a lot of really good moments. I will plug Chef Jamie, but this is not a plug for Chef Jamie. I don't know that I did not grow up on any stereotypes. I did not grow up in a diverse neighborhood or family, but I did not grow up in a family of hatred. I did not grow up in a family of divisiveness. I grew up in a family of inclusion. And all through my scholastic career and professional career, I've had great opportunities to work with many people from many walks of life. And I haven't had the opportunity that there was a horrible stereotype that I was like, oh, I'm an idiot. This doesn't actually exist, or they don't actually treat me like that, or whatever the case may be. But what I have found time and time and time again, and most recently with Chef Jamie, is when you sit down and have the conversations, something magical happens, and you find out you have a whole lot more in common than you ever would have thought you did.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing experience. And I don't use that word lightly. I saw an article that Susie Fleming Leonard, the food editor for the Florida Today newspaper, did on Chef Jamie. And it was after George Floyd. And it was about the racial tensions and the conversations that were being had and kind of what it's like to be a man of color who's a business professional in Brevard County. And it was an incredible article about his family and kind of what we talked about, growing up, being responsible parents, teaching your kids well, respect for law enforcement and your elders, which I've heard you say a number of times, and it shows, which means I'm old, but you're very respectful. But I was so moved by the article that she did on him. I called her and said, will you ask him if he'll go to lunch with me? And he accepted, and we went to lunch, and he brought his family, his beautiful wife and his 2 boys. And we literally had lunch for 2.5 hours.
Amazing.
It was nonstop. Just the next thing and the next thing and the next thing was amazing. And it turns out we had tons in common. It was an opportunity to educate both ways. He was so grateful to hear about the things that we're doing in mental health response and a bunch of other stuff on the law enforcement side because it touched him personally. We found out that he was in the band. He shares a lot of love for music that my wife does. He knows my wife's first husband, who we get along with. He's a great guy. And it was magical. It really was and we have been fast friends. His family and I have been fast friends ever since. I scooped him up with John's permission into Hey Blue as rapidly as we could. And since that point, Susie's doing another article on Hey Blue on Chef Jamie's involvement in it, and she's going to be there the night for the Hey Blue Plate dinner special to cover that as well. And she's doing a story that's going to be in the USA Today as well as the Florida Today newspaper. So it's going to be a national story. So that's a very long answer for your question.
I mean, I'm good. I love conversation. I think I was going to elaborate on what you were saying. I think in society today, it's condemned to sit and decipher what it is, you know, and what it's not. Mm-hmm. And I think having conversations like that, like genuinely like what we're doing and what you were doing with Chef Jamie, I think it really helps. Like you're saying, something magical happens because like you're saying, you don't know what you don't know until you know what you didn't know. Right. Right. So it's just that moment, I think, for certain people to either crawl back in their hole. I think it scares some people. And then some people, they blossom and they're like, wow, you know what I mean? And they take it and they run with it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
absolutely.
Yeah, that's crazy. That is crazy. I think we need more of that. Especially my generation, because we get stuck in our ways. You know, I know we always talk about how the adults are always stuck in their ways. And sometimes I'm just looking at us and I'm like, guys, come on now. Like, come on. History repeats itself. We know this is going to happen. And so I applaud that. And I wish I could have lunch for 2 hours. Imagine that.
That's not an often thing, I assure you, but I was not going to be the one to stop the magic, put it that way.
Because talking and food, like, I mean, come on. So my 9th question for you will probably be a little bit of thinker for both of us.
Okay.
As a young Black woman growing up, walking into stores, it's really hard to find products or clothing styles that fit my cultural background. Walmart, Target, if you go into Ulta, which is a makeup store. I don't know, your 17-year-old daughter might know about Ulta.
I know about Ulta.
So, okay, cool. So can I ask you why you think that is, why that might be?
You know, I don't know. That's an excellent question. So let me think for a moment. I'll put it back on you for my education. Has there been a demand for that product in mainstream places like Ulta to have that provided to their clients? Right. And I know I can't remember where it was, but I saw it was last Christmas. There was advertisements about a young woman of color who had her own clothing line. I want to say it was Target or Walmart, but not beauty products. That's a great question. And I'd love to hear your take on it.
Well, I think it has, I just remember there was one case, I believe, that this girl, she ended up suing Walmart. I'm pretty sure you're really familiar about it. When she walked into the hair care aisle, and there was, you know, all of the businesses that were dealing with hair protection and hair growth and conditioner and leave-in conditioner and things like that. And she got to the section for the minorities and it was locked. Like they had it all locked off. I think, I'm not sure if you know what I'm talking about, but it was like, it went around.
I don't know that specific one, but I've heard similar stories.
Okay, cool. Yep. And when it was sort of projected onto our generation, it was that one right there. And what you were saying is there's not really a high demand for it. I think after that, it started to be an issue because genetically speaking, there's a lot of things that in a Caucasian person's DNA, they have a certain build. It's just science. And then you go to an African-American, you know, or a Latino, the DNA structure is different. So we might have wider shoulders or something like that, especially in athletes, and not having clothing lines that are being put in stores by Black-owned businesses. Not to say that it's a bad thing that, you know, Caucasians are like, okay, you know, this is all of our stuff. But what I'm getting at is someone who would understand our body type, someone who knows. It's like, hey, you know, it's a little stressful. So I think to give you my opinion on that, it's that walking around. It's constantly trying to find something that would, fit our narrative, our culture, our background, things like that. So it was a difficult question, and I was like, I think that's good. I think that's a really good.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And maybe you would be willing to work with me after the fact to see what the issues are and what we could do to fix it.
Right. Ooh. Like I mentioned, I do believe it was to Jeremy Bohannon. When a few weeks ago when I interviewed him, I mentioned re-educating a lot of that, because a lot of people would be opposed to the idea if I'm like, hey, these clothes don't fit me, and it's not because it's a stereotype, it's not because it's racist, it's just because you're conforming to an ideology of a majority of people. Well, when you're dealing with minorities, it's like, what is there to accommodate us? And a lot of people will become standoffish, like, well, like going back to Black Lives Matter question. Well, why is it only that Black Lives Matter? No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is dealing with the majority, there's needs to be accommodations for it to be fair. You know what I mean? My dad is always like, there's a difference between fair and equal. Because he's like, hey, if I have cookies and there's 4 cookies, if I have 3 and you have 1, I mean, it's equal. We're both eating cookies. He goes, but if you want to be fair, then you get 2 and I'll get 2. And he taught me that since I was little, and I was like, oh, okay. So, but that's my opinion on that. That was a really long answer. I'm sorry to your.
It's okay. It's your show, Kairi.
So, question 10, my final question for you, Commander, would be, what measures work best to promote collaboration between police departments and the community and citizens?
Well, there's a ton, and it all comes down to communication, and one, being willing to have a conversation. And I'm going to go back to John. It all starts with hello, right? And in the way we normally say it, those relationships normally start with hello, but we already have relationships with our community as law enforcement. Sometimes they're good. Sometimes they're not so good. Sometimes they have areas for improvement. Sometimes they have a lot of areas for improvement, but it's always collaboration and communication. And I think you've heard me say it before. If you haven't, you'll hear me say it now, and you'll hear me say it 100 other times in the Hey Blue process. It doesn't matter how good the police agency is. I think we have an excellent police agency. And I know we have an excellent police agency. We have a very professional, very well-trained and equipped police agency that truly cares about the community that we serve. And that's important. But that's not the only thing. It doesn't matter how good we are doing. We will never, ever do as good and be to the best of our ability without that relationship with the community. And you talked in your last couple episodes about community-based policing. And that is the key. That is the nexus. That is the synergy that must exist to do the very best that we can possibly do. Right. So those conversations are imperative, defining the areas for improvement. And in most cases, I go back to just the education, just having the conversations to understand the why, what we're doing now. I'm not kidding. There was a list of, I think, 13 things, and like 9 of them we were already doing. And they just didn't know. Right. So it's the conversations, and there's going to be some tough ones to begin with, and there should always be tough ones. That's how we grow, right? You have those conversations. Right. It is getting out of your comfort zone is the growth. Sometimes it's education and understanding, and you or we may not like what the end result is, but we can work through it because it's the best for the community, and that's truly why we exist, is to serve and protect the community and the constitutional rights of every person in it. Right. Great answer. Thank you. I know that there's a lot of people who, again, when you were mentioning education and how it's, well, they don't do this and they don't do that. And I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure they do. I'm just not sure if you guys are 100% aware that they do stuff like that. Yeah. So I'm like, let's sit down, let's have that conversation. And I think that also deals with people speaking and saying, well, defunding the police. And I had mentioned in a few episodes, and I'm like, well, guys, what does that mean? Like, what are you, because like you're saying, there's a lot of things that you guys do. Yep. And a lot of people don't understand that you guys do that. So I like the term, like, not defunding, but I think, as I had stated before, taking different areas and funding them a little bit more because to accommodate, because
you need the police. You know what I mean? You need them. There's no getting around it, you know?
Yeah. I'm going to make this very quick because I know we got to move on. But on that, defunding the police, I agree with you holistically. And I'd love to have a much longer conversation with you offline. The overwhelming majority of people, when they say defund the police, do not mean abolish the police. They don't mean take funding away so the police can't do what they want. What they mean is providing funding for services that we presently try to provide are not equipped for. And it basically has been dumped on our lap for social services, addictions, homelessness, mental health. And I'm here to tell you, if they just relabeled it and partnered with law enforcement, I would venture to bet 100% of the officers in the United States would be ready, willing, and able to give those up to other entities with subject matter experts who know how to run that stuff. We're still part of the solution. We're just not. We're not driving that bus. We're on that bus with the subject matter experts that can take care of it. That being said, we can't pull funding from law enforcement because if we're going to be even better trained and better equipped to do what our job actually is outside of those peripheral issues, we have to have funding that we have now and probably some more so we can get better diversity training and extensive, like you talked about before. Sometimes it exists. I can't remember if it was Jeremy or which one, but the training exists in most of those cases. We can just expound on it and increase it. But those same 100% of officers across the U.S. would be willing to find the funding to support those peripheral entities and the subject matter experts to go with them to get those services out there because they're desperately needed.
Right. Okay, Commander, that was 10. I hope I didn't I hope I didn't scare you too much.
Not at all.
With any of the questions. Okay, cool. Good. So before we move on to you asking me my 10 questions, which I'm sure they're amazing, exuberant questions. I'm ready for them, actually. I would like to thank our sponsors. That would be CenterState Bank, Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream, love them. The Verdi EcoSchool, Hey Blue Initiative, love Hey Blue, Mr. John, and Exceed Concierge and Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Central Florida. So thank you guys so much for allowing these conversations to happen because they're needed. So, all right, Commander. So go ahead. Hit me.
Are you ready? Okay, super easy. There's no gotchas here. Question number 1. If you could change one thing right now, what would it be?
If I could change one thing right now, that's an easy question, but it's very vague, which I like because there's a lot of gray area and it can go any way that you want it to go. If I could change one thing right now, what would it be? If I could change one thing right now, I think it would be the lack of education when it comes to our school systems and raising the generations who come after us, because I think it's lacking a lot. So
what would be the subject matter? If you could pick one thing, what do you think we need more in?
History.
Excellent answer.
And it's not just with everything that's going on now in society with Black Lives Matter and everything. I really just think that history itself, I think it just needs to be raw. It needs to be there. And we all need to learn because we're learning from one perspective. And that would, the American history system. And nothing against the United States, but it's, what's going on in France, and what went on in Italy and things like that. You only learn about everything is always one-sided. Which is fine because we come from a very patriotic country. You know what I mean? We've always been that way. But I would really, if I could, I would refine history in the way it's taught. So, yes.
Awesome answer. Ready for 2. Question number 2. Yes. What are you doing right now to change your community for the better?
Well, actually, I am the student leader for Words Bond, an initiative aside from Hey Blue, still working with them. And I love it so far. I have created, with Mr. John and his wife and Miss Tammy and everybody, a small, I don't want to say it's like a group, it's like a little organization. And I bring kids in from different schools to sit down and talk about what they feel is most important, their issues. whether that be mental health, whether it be history, whether it be science, whether it be, down this road, a lot of people are speeding. How do we get, the police officers involved? I am dealing with these young adults who want change.
Mm-hmm.
And I love listening to their voices every day. So far, I have contracted 22 students, 23 including myself, who want to be a part of it. I've got schools like Space Coast, and I've got Vieira, and I've got Edgewood, and it's amazing so far. I got excited when you asked me that question because the kids are so bright, and I think it's a really good push for our future. So.
It's huge, and I'm confident that is your first wave of people to join you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
All right, question number 3. What is the most important thing you think the Melbourne Police Department is doing right now to change your community for the better?
Sitting and having the council meetings every month, officers like you who go out into the community and help, who want to connect with their citizens, not just on a, hey, what did you do? Why, not just on an on-call matter. It's everything.
Mm-hmm.
Because really, when I used to live in Port St. John before I moved here to Melbourne, the officers weren't really involved. And it's not a jab at BCSO or anything like that. I'm just saying that nobody was really involved. Even the resource officers at school, they weren't really involved. And then I ended up speaking at, where was I? It was a meeting held by Miss K. Mirage, and I happened to meet John there, and he pulled me in and everything. And so when we were talking about Word is Bond and doing the story times, I met officers like you and the chief, Melbourne. You guys, I think, are probably the most productive police department I have met so far. So
thank you for saying
that. You're welcome. So
do you know how long the Community Relations Council has been meeting every month?
Well, so far I have been to 3. My cousin ended up speaking at one of them, and you were on the board that time. I just hadn't met you yet. So I'm not 100% sure. So if you would like to enlighten me, I would love that.
If you had to guess, how long do you think the Melbourne Police Department has had the Community Relations Council?
So is that the trick question? Is it going to be like,
no.
It's been okay.
No, there's no pressure and no wrong answer. And I'll just tell you if you want. But if you had to guess, I was just curious how long you thought it was in play.
If I had to guess the amount of people that get there every month with a lot of concerns, I really want to say for like 2 years. I want to say 3 years. I'm not 100% sure.
Are you sitting down?
So.
Are you sitting down right now?
Yes, I am sitting down.
Would you be surprised if I told you over 20?
Really? That's amazing. I had no idea. Mm-hmm. Why am I just now knowing about this stuff? That's crazy. That needs to get out more.
Well, I'm glad you said that. I'm going to self-reflect and tell you probably one of the reasons you didn't know about it is because we're not doing a good enough job in advertising it. So how about you work with me to figure out how we can get it out? And the new force multiplier that has been added to our Community Relations Council meeting is high school age representation through Word is Bond. And now that we've had exponential growth, I think we will have a bigger voice and more people showing up to the meetings.
Amazing. Yes. Wow. That 20 years. I was only thinking like 2 or 3 because it's always a small group of people, but they're repetitive each time. They're consistent. They come every time. And I'm like, yes, this is a start. And I had no idea it was 20 years.
So now that you know that, this is why I think it's actually a good thing that there's so few people that show up on a regular basis. Now, if we have things to talk about, like the last one, which you did an excellent job, by the way, making yourself known, making Word is Bond known, and making that group and the police department realize that it's important for young minority representation and young community representation as a whole. It doesn't have to be a minority representation to have that voice, because it's not just the optics of a 50-year-old cop or a 50-year-old community member. It's the optics from you guys as well and what you bring to the table as issues. So knowing that those meetings have been going on so long, and knowing that they're every month and we have one north and one south to try to make it available to everybody on at least a bi-monthly basis, I see it as actually a very good thing that there is low attendance, because it means we're doing a good job maintaining that connectivity and communication from meeting to meeting.
Right.
So that there isn't a large number of people that show up voicing a concern that they're not being heard and their needs aren't being met.
Right.
So often, very often we go, and the number of officers that are there outnumber the attendees 3-4 to 1. Mm-hmm. And we will continue to show up in those numbers because we are committed to that relationship, the community, and the conversations that are had there. Right. And we always ask, and I'll put it out there because we don't want you to wait 30 days to come back and report. We want to give you a situational report on a problem you may have had in that 30 days. Please call when the event is happening. All right. Question number 4. If you could improve one thing about the Melbourne Police Department, what would it be?
I think it would just be that. Just what we talked about, the advertising for that, because I genuinely did not know it was 20 years. I think if that was out more, especially to our youth, a lot of kids would be super excited to want to push an agenda for change, an agenda for communication. I really think the advertising would be something that is most definitely needed. So,
and that goes back to education, right? So this is one more thing we could put on the list that we need to make sure that we push out. So I'm going to write that down, advertising. But I'm also going to do a 23-person RSVP for the next meeting. And I think it's really important too that we get the word out. We make it available to as many people that want to attend as possible, and we'll find a bigger venue if we have to.
Right.
Again, we want to have those conversations throughout the 30-day period, not waiting to report an issue or, don't wait 29 days to tell Commander Claycomb. We work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, call when the event is happening. Right. But that these initiatives pre-exist, George Floyd, 2020, any one thing, right? They've been in play for 20 years, and let's continue to use them bigger and better than we have historically. So
Right.
All right. Number 5. What will be the first thing you address as a civil rights attorney?
Wow. No one has asked me that question before. What would be the first thing I would address as a civil rights attorney? Wow. That sort of stumped me. There's so much. I look at that job and I'm like, I can do this and I can do that. And I can, take cases that are this. I think the first thing that I would address as a civil rights attorney is just understanding your rights front and back and knowing how they contribute to your person in society. Dealing with that, just knowing that can save you from a lot of things. That was a great question. There's so much that's just going on through my head that I'm like, because I just got excited.
That's good. The passion is there. I remember you talked about that, and your dad instilled that into you too. You need to be passionate about what you're doing. You clearly are. I want to go back to that. So I'm just going to reread the question as I wrote it because it's important the way I worded it. And we're going to go back to the very beginning intro story and some questions you asked me. What will be the first thing you address as a civil rights attorney? Not if you become a civil rights attorney, because it's deliberate, because I believe in you, and you're very intelligent, you're driven, and you're passionate about it, and you're going super far.
And it would be exactly that. Sitting there, I want to own my own law firm. It would be knowing your civil rights as on your person and all your other people that, you work with and you're friends with to an extent where you can just rattle them off. I think that knowing yourself here, not just in the United States, but anywhere that you go is extremely important. And it can save you from a lot of trouble. So
absolutely.
That's the first thing that I will be addressing.
Absolutely.
Mark, remember that. I'm taking notes in my head.
Perfect. I'll take notes also. You mentioned something about travel. Travel is incredibly important. Please, please, please travel. The world is much bigger than Melbourne and yourself. So go while you're young, travel. Don't take away from your studies. Stick to it. But travel, and learn. All right. Number 6. Question number 6. We already covered it, but if you have anything else you want to you can focus on the second part of the question. It's a two-part question.
Okay.
What does Black Lives Matter mean to you, and how can that align with our joined paths?
Well, restating what I said earlier about what Black Lives Matter means to me, I think it is accommodating for what has been misconstrued throughout history, dealing with rights of minorities, those of most definitely people of color. I don't agree with the whole funding that they portray to society. Does that make sense? Like, I don't agree with people just buying the merchandise and things like that. It's much bigger than that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't agree with how a lot of people use it. A lot of people hashtag it for, clout. I think it's something that speaks through action. Mm-hmm. It's not about the looting. It's not about the rioting. It's not about any of that. It's just genuinely about understanding and making that connection. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what Black Lives Matter means to me. So
okay. The second part is, how can that align with our joined paths?
Wow. How can that align? I understand the question, but I don't want to answer it wrong. So can you rephrase?
There is no wrong way to answer the question, but absolutely. So in what you believe in Black Lives Matter and what it means to you and what needs to be addressed, how can you and I, or a community member and law enforcement, work together to address those issues in a mutually beneficial way?
Communication. I think things just like this. And truthfully, I'm going to be 100% honest with you, Commander. If I were to say right now that I was going to create a panel for young African-American girls and boys to sit down and we all sit and talk about community relations dealing with officers and doctors and lawyers, a lot of people would be opposed to it. Because as I mentioned earlier, it's, well, why do you guys get certain accommodations and we don't? I really think it comes down to communication, educating Blacks, whites, Hispanics, anyone. I think that's where our paths cross and how we can use it for a benefit. I think that'd be my response.
It's a great response. And I want to go back to something you said about the Black Lives Matter. I think part of the issue, if I may be so bold to give my opinion on it, is if we really get down to the root issues that you want addressed, right? What Black Lives Matter means to you and what you want addressed, and we announce those issues.
Correct.
They can't be hijacked like a movement or a term and fractured and used by groups other than you know what I'm saying? So let's just focus on those things that need to be physically addressed, and we don't have to worry about being hashtagged for financial gain and all those other things. We're really addressing equality and equity and forward-moving conversations and positive. So on that note, I just want to, something that you had said about you and your friends sitting down and talking to professionals, asking questions and seeing what's available and maybe getting some knowledge dropped on you.
Yes.
I'm not speaking for the chief, but if I was able to get a community academy for you and your friends, would you be interested in doing that?
Most definitely. Most definitely. That's 100% yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we're going to have to get on the other side of COVID, but I will start laying the groundwork to get that approved now. Maybe your 22 closest friends can be part of that. And then that would give you a tour of the facility. You'd meet some people. You'd be able to ask some questions. You can learn about what we do and why we do it, policies and procedures, case law, all kind of good stuff.
Oh, thank you.
You're very welcome. Number 7. Personal question, and you do not have to answer. Have you ever been subjected to racism or bullying?
Wow. I have not always been an extrovert. I started off as an introvert, didn't really like to talk. I don't know what it was about me. In first grade, multiple times, there was a girl, I'm not going to disclose names, but she was raised with prejudice, most definitely, about people of color. And I remember one day walking home, well, not walking home, but I was walking to class. I had used the restroom, and two of her friends and her, so three girls, followed me to the water fountain and ended up bashing my head into the water fountain, calling me names and everything like that because of the color of my skin. I remember being followed to lunch, and she told me to go back to my country because I didn't belong here. And she just, it was just how she was raised. I'm not mad at her, not at all, because those biases have been instilled in her. That is sort of what pushed me out of my shell, to not be an introvert, because it was dealing with situations like those, which I still go through, that really, my mom and my dad were like, hey, this is what it means, honestly, to be Black in America. All jokes aside, my dad used to tell me, never really be surprised on what a white person thinks about you. Because I deal with it I was followed. That was a great question. One last example for you is I was followed recently my sophomore year. I'm a junior now. Out of the cafeteria by two boys. Me and my best friend, we were followed, and they were in my face, threatening to hurt me and calling me the N-word and so many racial slurs, all the way to my classroom from lunch. And, I was trying not to react aggressively or anything like that, because the stereotype for girls like me is I'll be pregnant at age 16. I'll be on welfare. I won't have a baby daddy. And I really won't make it anywhere in life. So I have most definitely been subjected to racism and a victim to a lot of prejudice. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for your honesty and your openness and sharing that. And I want to say from the bottom of my heart, I am so very sorry that you had to go through that. And in all of those circumstances, I truly am. Nobody should have to go through that. And that's not acceptable, but it's incredibly mature and big of you to recognize that's a learned behavior. And it had so much less to do with you and so much more to do about how unhappy they are and their upbringing and all those things. But I'm also super proud of you and how mature you are and how you turned that around and you benefited from it. You're this extrovert, super bright, 10,000 gigawatt smile, intelligent lady that you're launching from here and you're going places. So
thank you
for what it means to you. I'm proud of you. You're a very incredible young lady.
Thank you.
So question number 8. You ready for this one?
Yes.
I'm asking you and your family to lunch. Where should we eat and why?
Where should we eat and why? I don't know. It just depends on what I've got to taste for that day, because sometimes I'm really picky.
All right. Fair enough.
Dad would probably be the person. This is where we're eating. If you don't like it, then, we're not. It doesn't matter what. So, I'm just kidding. Normally, in a household full of girls, he gets the last say.
Well, so, give him a win every once in a while.
Yeah. So probably with you inviting us to dinner, which thank you, by the way.
Absolutely.
That'll probably be his choice, because he's like, if I'm going to sit and talk, I'm going to want food I want. So
fair enough. Well, I am asking you guys to eat, but I would like very much for you to have a vote and veto power, but Dad's dad. So I'm not going to take his power from him.
I would vote like Longhorn or something like that. Cause I like their bread and their steak. It's really good.
Okay. Perfect. I'm a foodie. I eat just about anything. So, and I always like to try new things. Question number 9. You've kind of already answered this, and this is a small part of the much bigger picture, but I'm going to ask you anyway in case it spurs something. If I can get permission from our chief and your parents to lower the age for the ride along, would you be interested in doing a ride along at the police department?
Yes. Most definitely. I have a friend, her father's a police officer. And she's wanted to do, her birthday's actually Sunday. She'll be 18, so there's really no point now, but she's always like, oh, I want to do ride-alongs. They should make it so that like kids who are like almost there, like we should be able to, do ride-alongs. I'm like, I think if you like have your parents sign or can, contribute something like that. So that's a good question. I would love it. I would love to do that. So thank you.
So follow-up question. Why would you love to do it?
Because truthfully, there's been a lot of biases that have been instilled in a police officer, just in general. and I know better because my great-grandfather was a sheriff. I have so many friends whose parents are officers. I've grown up around such positive influences, and I'm like, it's not always negative. And I've never had anything against wanting to do a ride along. I'm like, I want to do it, especially just to prove to my peers, especially people of color, young people of color who have a lot of biases towards the police academy, or, I want to be able to share that story. Like, hey, it's not this, it's this, because one voice can spark a whole lot of commotion. So
100%. And I think it's important that if they have biases against the police, but I think it's important for them to learn that maybe the things they've learned about biases of police to their community might not fit either.
Right.
So that's super important. Oh man, I had another question, follow-up question. I was going to ask you now. I can't remember what it was. I reserve the right to come back. Fair?
Yes.
All right. Question 10.
Yes, sir.
This is the big one. Oh, I know what it was. Can we go back for just a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
So in your previous episodes, you had talked about friends of yours that had wanted to go into law enforcement, but had changed their mind of this year with what's in the media and what's going around.
Yeah.
Would you ask them if they would be willing to and come with them to talk to me? And we can have some very open discussions about this career and what's available to them?
Of course. I'm literally naming the names in my head right now, and they'd love it.
Okay.
So I would definitely mention that. Yes.
And even if it's not Melbourne they want to come work for, and there's zero judgment in that, although we're awesome. I'd love to talk to them about the career and what it is and what it isn't. And I mean, some really candid conversations about they need to be mentally prepared if they really want to do it, and maybe answer some of the questions and concerns they have about this year and policing.
Okay.
All right. So that leads into question 10. If you don't get a scholarship, so this is theoretical because I'm pretty sure you're getting your way paid to college, but if you don't get a scholarship, would you be interested in coming to work for the Melbourne Police Department as an officer? And before you answer that, we have a trainee program that if you come on board with the trainee program, we pay for your police academy, we pay for your books, we pay for your uniforms, we give you a partial salary while you go to the police academy. Then when you graduate the academy, pass the exam, we give you a full salary and bring you on board to start your training process and work as a full-time officer. And we have a tuition reimbursement program to help pay for your college.
Well, to answer your question, I really wouldn't mind. I think that would be great. I used to want to be a police officer, and then it changed. I've always been in the fields of like helping people. Used to want to be a doctor, and now I want to be an attorney. I used to want to be an officer and also a CSI agent. So I think the field is really interesting to me. I would have absolutely no problem joining a police force. So especially Melbourne, I'm good. I'm down with
I'm confident you wouldn't have a problem. I just wanted to know if you were interested in doing it. And you'll find there actually are a lot of attorneys that started in law enforcement and actually went into law, and really any law you go into, and including civil rights. It could benefit you in the long run to have the optics of being a police officer on the street, what laws and case laws are, and lead you into that career of civil rights. Because obviously we work with the ACLU and various attorneys in that realm on a regular basis. So that is my 10th question to you.
All right. That's 20 questions. So now we have our 21st question from our viewer. Now, Commander Marc, this can be towards you, or it could be towards me, or it could be towards both of us.
Okay.
So let's see what's thrown at us. So, oh, it's to me. Okay. So thank you so much for preparing for and conducting this interview. Oh, you're welcome. Will you recommend one or two of the books you have? Okay. Yes. I love this one. Okay. I read it for Hey Blue Storytime. I know it's a children's book, but it's just really good. Anyone would love it. My mom sat and read it, and she was like, "Oh, it's a really good book." I don't know. Go check it out. Plug Hey Blue. Okay. The story times. It's about just everybody being one, like having this conversation that I'm having with all these officers now. I love this book, creating connections. no matter what color, race, ethnicity that you are. So I really suggest this book. And when Mr. John had asked me to come on and he was like, hey, will you do story time, pick a book? I was like, this one, you know, and I was picking it because of the front cover, but then I read the book and I was like, I really like this book. So I Am Enough. Yes. This book, Black Boy by Richard Wright. I'm only on like chapter 10, but this book is absolutely amazing for somebody who wants to really understand what it means to be Black in America and the mental health that not just Black women go through, which is most definitely a struggle, but our foundation, our kings, the men. I think this takes place, in the 1970s, 60s, 70s. So the civil rights movements, things like that, Martin Luther King, it's a really good book. It's actually been banned in public schools because it gets to the nitty gritty. So I would suggest those two books to anybody looking forward to read. So yeah, thank you. But that's it for tonight, Commander. Thank you. You made it through. I hope it wasn't too stressful.
It was awesome and amazing experience. I'm truly honored to be here. I thank you so much for asking me.
Thank you for being here and the amazing work that you are doing.
Thank you.
Plug Melbourne Police Department. Thank you guys so much. But before you go, I have one last question for you.
Okay.
And that would be, do you still have love for me? Like we still have love for each other, Commander?
Kairi, I have love for you and your family for days. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. I still have love for you immensely and a mad respect as well. So I'm doing great things with you. I'm not on my own. I'm surrounded by great people. Shout out to Storm and White Panther and Panther and Cage and the rest of the group. It's truly a remarkable group of people all over the planet at this point that are helping out. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. All right, guys. So that's it for tonight. Thank you guys for joining us. I'd like to thank our sponsors one more time before we head out. CenterState Bank, Ben & Jerry's. Thank you guys. Verdi EcoSchool. Hey Blue, the initiative, amazing. Thank you guys. Exceed Concierge and Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Central Florida. So thank you guys so much. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks with another show. Thank you for tuning in.